They want me to stand up here in the light. I know that that might be good for while they're filming it, but I'm an awfully long way away from you, aren't I? So that is not good. And so if you're filming this here, I suspect I'm going to be drawn down onto the floor closer to these people by the time the night ends. So I'm sorry to break that to you. And maybe what we will do, maybe I might just do it myself. When you all go home, I'll just move all the chairs forward. What is the space for? What do we do? Dancing? Oh, okay. Because I know how crazy you Norwegians are, so, so I should have known you'd be dancing down here. Well, what do you want to tell you a bit about myself? It is kind of funny being invited to speak and people don't know who you are. Thomas emailed me and said, I'm Thomas and you're coming to my church, so who are you and what do you do? And so I thought, well, why did you want me to come to your church if you don't know who I am and what I do? So here's who I am and what I do. My name is Michael Frost. I'm from Sydney, Australia. It's the only city in Australia that currently is not underwater. Or at least I hope it's not underwater because my wife and family are there. I am a professor in a seminary. I'm a professor of missiology or missions, evangelism, church planting, that kind of thing. In my spare time I plant churches and have been coaching church planters. I'm not being funny when I say that. I think the only way we're actually going to change, the only way you're going to change your nation and I'm going to change mine is if we can actually generate capable Christian leaders who can plant churches in their spare time. Because if you've got to actually wait for someone to do 6 years of theological study before they can get qualified in order to go and then do something like that, it's only going to slow down the whole process. So I think you can plant a church in your spare time. That's the kind of movement that I'm trying to generate in my own country. I am an ordained Baptist minister. I used to be the pastor of a large attractional kind of Baptist church in the western suburbs of Sydney, not far from where Hillsong is today. Hillsong was smaller than our church when I was the pastor of that church. So I always say, imagine how big that church would have been if I had have stayed there. Way bigger than Hillsong. But I did get to a point, and I may not go into this story in any great detail, but I did get to a point where I just felt that I wasn't able to continue to play that kind of highly competitive, attractional church game. I don't know if you know what that means, but I had to out-preach all the other pastors, and we had to out-sing and worship all the other churches, and we had to out-children's ministry all the other churches. And I'm a fallen, broken man, so it just drew on all my most unredeemed competitive desires, and I got to a point, I guess, where I thought to myself, is this really what Jesus had in mind? And I couldn't continue with it. And so again, that's a process that took some time, but I went through a process of trying to rediscover what it was that this dude had in mind when he actually called us to follow him in mission. What was it that he was actually instituting among these impressionable young fishermen and tax collectors and zealots that he gathered together from the north of Israel up in Galilee and then set on a mission to actually kind of transform the whole world. And so ever since then I've been travelling and speaking and planting and coaching people to actually recover the kind of inherent Jesus-centred genius of what it is for us to be the followers of this person in the world today. So that's a bit about me. As we talk, you'll hear some stories and stuff about who I am and what I do. I'm married, got 3 daughters. Someone asked me, did I have kids? I said, well, do you call a 25-year-old a kid, a 22-year-old a kid, or a 19-year-old a kid? If you do, then I've got kids. If you don't call them that, I've got women. I have got lots of women in my life. The thing I've discovered about raising women is that you might have 3 of them who've got the same name as you, but you've always got like 6 or 8 or 10 of them in your house. Like women hunt as a pack, I've discovered. And so on the weekend I'd wake up and I would go to each of their bedrooms and just open the door and look in to see how many women were in each room, because they all had like double beds, so you'd have 3 in this room and 2 in that room and 5 in this room, and you'd be reading the paper on Saturday morning and just more and more women would just come out of places. It's like, I am just totally marinated in estrogen, and to be honest, I'm just a big girl man from Australia. It's like, it didn't do me any harm. I'm doing okay with all that estrogen too. So I mean, it does annoy me lifting the toilet seat all the time. But I'm drawing the line. I don't sit down when I go to the toilet. I just go, no, that's too estrogen-like for ego. Let me begin by telling you a story about one of the most extraordinary church services I ever went to. And I tell you about this not to tell you how to do church services, church worship services, but because it does actually lead us into where I think the Lord wants me to go tonight. It feels like that light is winking at me. So. I was in Houston, Texas once at an emerging church, missional church kind of gathering, and we were asked to go to a communion service, a service of the Lord's Supper at First Baptist Church, Houston, Texas. It was what I expected First Baptist Church to look like. It's got big columns on this huge porch out the front of the church. Walk inside, big high ceilings, stained glass windows. But other than that, other than the shell of this building, nothing else that went on that day was the least bit Southern Baptist, or maybe not even the least bit Texan. It was quite an extraordinary service. Walked into the building. They had removed all of the church furniture. Not a single pew, pulpit, lectern, nothing. The whole place was stripped bare. They had covered the floor with black plastic. And it's a very large building. In the middle of the room, there was a mountain of wet garbage and household rubbish. I'm not talking about boxes and papers and kind of hard rubbish. It was like food scraps, like banana peels and fish bones and meat bones and milk bottles, and it was wet, stinking garbage from your kitchen. It was about this high. It was literally a mountain of it. And it was seeping like little rivers of garbage juice out across the floor. So when you walked into the building, expect to be celebrating communion. The smell hit you, and then the fact that they'd created this sort of beautiful mountain of disgusting rubbish was sort of kind of stunning. There was nowhere to sit, so we all just kind of stood around the mountain of garbage. And then, as the service began, 2 men came out, one from either door on either side of the platform, and they were wearing brown kind of robes, like monks' habits, like cassocks tied up at the waist. And they then began to lead us through a series of prayers and reflective readings and songs and Bible readings. There were 4 screens in each corner of the building. And as they led us, they would walk around the room as they were leading us through various different parts of the liturgy. But as we came to the kind of central moment in the liturgy, which was the celebration of the Lord's Supper, they did something quite stunning. They both walked over to the mountain of garbage, and they removed their robes, and they were wearing only Speedos. And that in itself is kind of remarkable, isn't it? But what they did next took my breath away. These 2 men, as they were speaking and leading us toward the Lord's table, walked into the mountain of garbage, wading into all the rubbish until they were up to their waists in household rubbish, food and smell. And as they were leading us into the liturgy, they reminded us that if you eat this bread and you drink this wine this night, you don't just celebrate Jesus' atoning sacrifice on the cross. You do, but not just that. You don't just celebrate Jesus' defeat of sin and death and the devil in his resurrection from the dead. You do, but not just that. When you come to the Lord's table, you also celebrate the extraordinary truth that our God, perfect in every way, with no need beyond himself whatsoever, willingly took on flesh and waded into the shit and the piss and the crap and the garbage of human society. And then one of them looked down and picked up a bottle of wine in a brown paper bag. And the other looked down and picked up a loaf of bread wrapped in plastic. And they said, tonight, if you choose to eat this bread and drink this wine, take off your shoes, roll up the legs of your pants, hitch up your skirt or your dress, and you walk into this mountain to receive this feast. And in so doing, you will be saying to the living God that just as the Father sent his Son into the garbage and the crap of this world, so send me. Now, I've taken communion in plenty of places in all sorts of ways, but I've never forgotten taking off my shoes, hauling up my pants, walking into that mountain and feeling the squelch between my toes. I mean, I only got up to my calves or halfway up to my knees, but it reminded me that when we dare to say that we worship Jesus and follow him, we don't just worship him because he's the key that God uses to unlock the door for us to have a relationship with God the Father. He does do that, but what we say when we eat that bread and we drink that wine is, we will follow you into the broken stench of this world. See, a lot of people, like Matthew's commission, go into all the world and make disciples. Well, it's not a competition about which gospel has the best commission, but I do happen to like John's gospel's Great Commission just as much, where Jesus says to his mates, fishermen, tax collectors, zealots, ordinary illiterate men from the north of Israel, he says to them, just as the Father has sent me, so do I send you. Now, the thing I love about that commission is it doesn't just tell you that you're sent. Matthew's Great Commission tells us that too. But in John's Great Commission, we're actually told the very way or nature that we ought to be sent in. Just as the Father sent me, says Jesus, so I send you. Look at me, says Jesus to his disciples. What have you seen from the last 3 years? Look at me, God in human form. Look at me, who's waded into the garbage of this world. Look at me, who's eaten with tax collectors and sinners. Look at me, who's touched lepers. Look at me, who hangs out with the broken and the lost of this world. Look at me, who brought healing on the broken. Look at me, who's fed the hungry. Look at me, who's taught you about a whole world where everything gets turned upside down, the first to last and the last to first. Look at this, just as the Father sent me in this way. Look, so then I send you. Bread stuck to the roof of my mouth that morning. I had trouble swallowing it back down because I can tell you folks, I can eat that meal and celebrate the fact that he died for my sins. I can eat that meal and celebrate the fact that he defeated death by being resurrected 3 days later. But it really sticks in your mouth when you eat that meal as an act of worship, as an embracing of our commission to go into the world as he did. But we need to rediscover, even in the most conventional, wonderful, middle-class Christian Norway, is what does it look like for us to take off our shoes and walk into the shit and the piss and the crap and the garbage and the brokenness and the loneliness and the depression and the broken relationships and the hatred and the fear that are on all of your streets of every town and village in Norway. You eat this bread, you drink this wine, you're eating a mouthful. So what does it mean for us to follow Jesus into that mission? What does it mean for us to not just be the recipient of Jesus' grace, but to be agents of that grace? What kinds of things do we need to bear in mind? You see, conventional Christians in traditional or attractional churches, they have to worry about whether padded seating, upholstered chairs are better than pews. They have to worry about whether we should play pop and rock music or classical hymns. They have to worry about things that for the most part actually don't really have a whole lot to do with wading into the mountain of rubbish here in Norway. But those of us who are prepared to follow Jesus into mission, we need to ask ourselves, by what principles will we be supported? And I want to give you a number of them tonight. A number of things we need to bear in mind if we are going to follow Jesus, frightened, empty-handed, barefooted, into the world into which he has already gone before us and invites us to follow him. You're with me so far? Yes. So, I think the first thing that we need to do if we're going to take this seriously is learn to let Jesus be our reference point. My big fear, folks, and I'm sure it's not the case in your church, but I can tell you now, in my country, it's the case in many, many churches. We have got, I just accidentally bumped myself, and we have got hundreds and hundreds of Christians growing up in our churches who actually don't know anything about Jesus. Could you believe that? I mean, they know he died for my sins. I mean, they know he was the Son of God. Like, they can say those phrases of proper orthodox theology. I mean, they know that kind of stuff. They know he's God, he's King, he's my Lord. They sing songs to him, they praise him, he's holy, he's gracious. They know all that kind of stuff. But you ask them, tell me something about Jesus, tell me who it is that you're following. They have a great deal of difficulty actually telling you very much about him at all. And yet the very fact of the matter is this, folks. If we say that we're following Jesus into mission, Jesus ought to be the template of what we're wanting to be and to do in this world. Don't you agree? We're not just saved by Jesus and now we go off and, well, let's make it up as best we can. We don't have to make it up as best we can. You need to look like a little Jesus. You are sent into this world to emulate him in this world. So you need to let Jesus be your reference point. You need to encounter the biblical Jesus again. And the fact of the matter is, I fear that a great many Christians, possibly in this country, I don't know, but certainly in my country and in other countries that I have visited, are actually more influenced in their thinking about Jesus by popular culture and by art than they are by the reading of the Gospels. You know, in 1854, a man named Holman Hunt painted a picture of Jesus that became world famous. It was called Jesus, the Light of the World. Have you ever seen that picture of Jesus? He looks like Richard the Lionheart. He's got a red beard and a crown, and he's wearing a white nightgown and a red robe, and he's got a lantern, and then he's knocking on the door of somebody's heart. Anyone seen that picture? It's world famous. 1854 he painted that. They took it on a world tour, this one picture, on a world tour at the turn of the century. When it came to my city of Sydney, 1/3 of the population of Sydney lined up at the art gallery to go and look at it. During World War I, Australian, British, New Zealand forces carried postcards of this image of Jesus in their breast pocket, because this was to keep Jesus near to them when they were about to be killed in the trenches of World War I. I mean, this image has shaped the way people think about Jesus. He's English, he's a king, he's white-faced, blue-eyed. He's wearing a woman's nightgown. He's knocking passively on the door of your heart. Holman Hunt believed the Holy Spirit had told him to paint this picture. And the Holy Spirit told him, don't put a door knob or a door handle on the door, because that's the door of people's hearts. It can only be opened from the inside. He got this from Revelation chapter 3. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. You familiar with this? Whoever opens the door to me. The only problem is, folks, that passage, that verse is not referring to non-Christians and their hardened hearts. Who is that chapter of Revelation written to? It's written to an apostate church. It's written to a church saying Jesus is outside the church, asking if he can come in. It's not about evangelism or giving your life to Jesus. And yet it pictures this passive, gentle, kind of wide-eyed Jesus. You know, the kind of one you see in the movies? He kind of floats 3 centimetres off the road. Like looking to bless people and heal people. Folks, maybe it's kind of images like this that have not helped us very much in the process. You see, a great deal of these images have emerged entirely have emerged entirely thanks to Holman Hunt's original image. I mean, have a look at these. I refer to them as the bearded lady Jesus. I mean, because in many respects, I mean, they look pretty beautiful and feminine, don't you reckon? Like, I mean, I think with this one by Werner Salzer, if you could just like take the beard away, like, she's hot. These pictures are in churches all around the world, everywhere. This is what most people think Jesus looks like. This is what people wish Jesus looks like. And I know you've got one yourself here. Who said Jesus looks like that? Where did you get that idea? You've been sold a stereotypical image of Jesus and you bought it. And if you actually went to your Gospels, you'd have a great deal of difficulty imagining any of those dudes doing anything like what Jesus does. This is not what Jesus looks like. Nothing like it. He's not passive. He's not wide-eyed, and he's not white-skinned and blonde-haired. The Jesus that we find in the Gospels is radical and wild. He comes from the roughest part of Israel, from Galilee. You know that anyone who said that if a son who was being raised in Galilee showed any kind of religious inclination, the family should ship him down to Jerusalem to live with relatives, because no one could grow up holy in Galilee. Galilee was surrounded by pagan tribes and nations and had been deeply influenced by them. This is where Jesus grows up. This is where Jesus, as I said before, handpicks a gathering not of sophisticated, intelligent men. He gathers a group of illiterate, uneducated, impressionable men. No wonder the religious authorities just dismissed him out of hand. You see, the Jesus of the Gospels probably looked more like this. This is an image that was created by the BBC in the United Kingdom. They found a 1st century Palestinian skull. And you know, they do that CSI thing, and they add the plasticine. And so this is actually the face of a 1st century Palestinian man. They're not saying that's Jesus. They're saying that's what Palestinian men looked like in the 1st century. What does this guy look like? Look at his thick neck. Look at his heavy brow. Look at his bushy eyebrows and his round nose and his heavy jaw. Look at his short, curly, oily hair and his olive-coloured skin. This guy looks like he could be boarding an aeroplane for the World Trade Center, don't you think? This guy looks like he belongs with Al-Qaeda, not with the Lutheran Church of Norway. Friends, I'm not suggesting that it's a big deal about how you literally picture the physical face of Jesus. I'm saying you're more influenced by the bearded lady than you are by the 1st century Palestinian Jesus. Go back to your Gospels. I want you to follow Jesus into the mission field, and I want you to let Jesus be your reference point. Jesus hangs out with sinners. Jesus enjoys the company of the lost. And guess what? It seems as though they really enjoy his company. Have you noticed? In fact, prostitutes, sinners, the marginalised, the poor, they loved him. These are the very people who despise Jesus' followers today. Have you noticed? Now, work this out. The same people who loved Jesus hate Jesus' followers. What's wrong with that picture? Go back to your Gospels and let Jesus be your reference point. We need to recover something of the radical, wild, exciting Jesus, the Jesus who turns the world upside down. This is an image from late 1990s where the Church of England in England ran a campaign to get people to go back to church, as you can see on April the 4th. This image was wildly popular. When people started putting it on T-shirts, everyone loved it. It had the radical left-wing or communist red. It had Jesus looking like Che Guevara. And it has a great slogan, meek, mild, as if. Discover the real Jesus, church, April 4. Now, I dig it. I think it's pretty cool. Except I've always wondered how many people saw that billboard in England in 1999 or whatever it was and thought to themselves, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I want. I want a bit of radical religion. I want a bit of wild Jesus. Yeah, I'm going to church on April 4. And when they got there, there was a vicar with a dress on celebrating some weird Holy Communion with 15 little old ladies. You'd be thinking, well, when are you bringing that wild Jesus guy out? Is that happening soon? The fact of the matter is Jesus was wild. He was a radical. Religious people wanted him dead. Now, folks, it's one thing to want Jesus silenced. It's one thing to want Jesus to just pack up and go away. It's a whole nother thing to want him dead, is it not? You only want people dead if they are a serious threat to the religious system of which you're part. Jesus literally subverts the whole world of which he's part and then invites us to wade into that world with him. Sometimes the images that we need to find or think about Jesus are ones perhaps not even from the West. This is an image that comes from Mexico. You can see it's Jesus, can't you? Because he has the red halo around him. He has the letters Alpha and Omega, meaning the beginning, the end. He's God. And of course, his hands have been pierced by the nails on the cross. Other than that, I guess we might not know whether that's Jesus. That's a Mexican revolutionary in a sense, isn't it? But was Jesus imprisoned? Was Jesus marginalised? Was Jesus despised by the authorities? Maybe we need to rediscover some of the images of Jesus that we find from other parts of the world. Maybe the gentle Jesus, meek and mild, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, English King Jesus isn't helping us one little bit. Maybe we need to learn that, say, an image like this one from El Salvador in the 1970s, an image of a Jesus laughing his head off. Why don't we have any pictures like that in any of our churches? Do you think Jesus laughed? Do you think he laughed a lot? Do you think he was the kind of guy who was actually the life of the party? I mean, don't get me wrong. Jesus gets pretty cranky and he gets pretty dirty and mean sometimes. But clearly those who are outside the religious structures warmed to this extraordinary man. And when you think about it, any ever hung out with people from the Middle East? Ever eaten a meal with Lebanese, with Jordanians, with Syrians? Well, we've got this terrible image of them as all being terrorists or something. Nobody eats and laughs and drinks and talks like someone from Lebanon, and they do it all at the same time. Folks, maybe Jesus was like that. Maybe we need to, as church leaders, simply take our congregations back into re-Jesusing our congregations. Just read the gospel over every single week. In our church, it's compulsory. You belong to our church, you will read the gospel through every single week. You'll be held accountable to it. You'll meet in a little triad of 3 people and they'll ask you, what did you learn about Jesus this week? Not kind of what did you imagine, what did you picture, what do you remember from some movie you saw? Jesus. See, our problem, my friends, is that we are raising generations of Christians who just don't know how to let Jesus be their reference point. I was speaking at a conference of Christian surfers. I know you've got some beaches around here and this is a great place to surf. At the moment I find it very hard to believe, but I'm sure I'll take your word for it. We specialise in surfing in Australia because it's a gigantic island and everyone lives around the edges. There's an organisation called Christian Surfers, and they just hold surfing clinics and tournaments on beaches all around the island, and then they talk to kids about Jesus. So they're a very effective outfit. I think they're great. What I'm about to tell you oughtn't to be taken to indicate that I don't think that they're a terrific group. They are. But I was speaking at a conference of all the leaders of Christian surfers groups all around the country, in Australia. And I said to them, let's do a little exercise together here. Here's what I want you to do. Tell me, just who's your favourite surfer? Now and there was probably about this many people, I suppose. When you ask a room, with this many people in it, and you're all surfers, who is your favourite surfer, what do you think happens? I forgot. I keep forgetting. You don't ask Norwegians rhetorical questions. Here's what happened. When you ask a room full of this many people who are absolutely committed and love surfing, who is their favourite surfer, it is pandemonium. Everyone starts calling out their favourites. There's names coming at me like a rate of knots. So I say to them, okay. I hear enough people say Kelly Slater. Kelly Slater's an American surfer. He's won the World Championship 10 times. It's unbelievable. He's a freak. He's just the most awesome surfer that has ever lived. I mean, he's like Tiger Woods, except he's a nice guy. So it's just it's incredible. So I hear enough people say Kelly Slater. Okay. I say, well, let's just take Kelly Slater as an example. Tell me, what do you know about Kelly Slater? Again, my friends, if you ask a room full of obsessed surfers to tell me what they know about probably the greatest surfer that's ever lived, what do you think happens next? It was chaos. These people were bursting out of their skin. It's like there were people saying where he grew up, how many brothers and sisters he's got, where he lives now, which famous people he's dated. They're telling me all the years that he won his 10 world championships. One guy yelled out the wrong year of one of the 10 years. Everyone was like yelling, throwing things at him. It was like they are taking me through, when he won his 8th title, it was neck and neck between him and, so on. I mean, they could tell me minute detail. They were all yelling it at me at the same time. And then I said, okay, we got it, calm down. It took me forever to settle them down. They were all sort of like this at the end of it. So calm down. We went on and did some other stuff. Then a little bit later in the day, I'm talking about letting Jesus be their reference point. And I said to them, I want you to be like Jesus on the beaches with the grommets that you're teaching, the people who are running the tournaments with. So I said, tell me, what do you know about Jesus? There was silence. I said, no, come on, just let me have it. Come on, just what do you know? Let me tell me your favourite stuff. Someone says, he died for our sins. He's the Son of God. He's my Lord and Saviour. I said, why can't you talk to me about Jesus the way you can talk to me about Kelly Slater? I'm not saying that they do not love the Lord. They do. They lead kids to Jesus all the time. They lead them through 4 spiritual laws. Jesus is point number 3. But I don't want you to just make Jesus one of the points in your gospel presentation. I don't want you to make Jesus just, as I said before, the key that God uses to open the door. I want you to know as much about Jesus as an obsessed surfer would know about Kelly Slater. I want when I walk into a room of Norwegian Christians and say, come on, tell me, what's your favourite thing about Jesus? That I would be overwhelmed by people talking to me about their hero, their brother, their saviour, their king, their friend. Do you follow? You can't be like Jesus if you don't know what Jesus looks like. And to be quite frank, please don't mishear this. It's fine for us to sing songs about you're beautiful, Jesus. I look into your eyes and you're beautiful. But let's be clear what we're doing when we sing songs like that. He's not beautiful like that. He's beautiful like that. He's beautiful in the scariest way. He's beautiful because, as Isaiah said of him hundreds of years before, there would be nothing about him that would attract any of us to him. But from him beams a brand new world, a world of justice and peace and goodness and mercy and joy and flavour and deliciousness. When people were with him, they felt that they were in the presence of everything the world should be like. I want them to say the same about you. I want them to say, those Christians, I tell you what, they laugh louder than anybody else. Those Christians, they serve more than anyone else. Those Christians, they give more than anybody else. And you remember that really old movie, When Harry Met Sally? Do you remember? Yeah, Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks? Is it Tom Hanks? Yeah. I only remember Meg Ryan for some reason. Meg Ryan, Sally's talking to Harry in the deli in New York and she's saying to him, women fake orgasms. Are you kidding? Harry can't believe it. No way. I could tell if someone was faking it. And then Sally goes into a full-blown fake orgasm in the middle of the deli. Do you remember this scene? Yeah. Don't think too much about it, but you remember it, right? And then there's the punchline is, of course, after she's had her orgasm, is that the old lady at the table next to says to the waiter, I'll have what she's having. Well, folks, the bottom line for us is we ought to let Jesus be our reference point and live such orgasmic, delicious, marvellous lives that people would say, I'll have what they're having. Yeah. I want to do what they're doing. Yeah. You ought to hold the best parties in town. Yeah. You ought to give away more money than anybody in town. You ought to work harder for justice than anyone in town. You ought to practice peace and reconciliation between men and women, young and old, immigrant and Indigenous. You folks ought to show us what it looks like to be fully alive, as Jesus was. You want to be missional. You don't have to be cool. You don't have to be kind of funky. You don't have to get multiple tattoos, piercings, hang around in bars, drink lots of red wine, talk about emerging things. No, folks, you just have to let Jesus be your reference point. When our city turned 150 years old, we're a young country, so the city that we're part of had its 150th celebration. The mayor rang me up and said, would your church be willing to organise the ball, the big party, the celebration of our 150th? And I said, well, I don't think so. Why? We're not event managers or anything. We don't do that. No, he said, but listen, every time I've been to any function you guys have run, it is the best party I've ever been to in my life. Wow. So, we want a party that night. We're 150 years old. Could you run it? You know that you're kind of being a bit like Jesus when they ask you to run their parties for them, don't you think? Our town has the highest incident of alcohol-related violence in our whole state, our whole region. The mayor rang me, this is a different mayor actually, the next mayor that we got rang me and said, we spend $1.4 million every year on trying to curb alcohol-related violence. We've got a whole bunch of pubs at an entertainment precinct. They're open 24 hours over the weekend. Young people go in there, they get drunk, they stumble from one pub to the next, fights break out, it's chaos. Pandemonium every Friday and Saturday night. The mayor rings me, says we spend $1.4 million every year trying to curb alcohol-related violence. CCTV cameras, education programs, fines for the pubs if they serve drunk people, all this sort of stuff. It makes no difference at all. Have you got any ideas of what we could do? When your town turns to you to deal with something which is cracked and broken in this world, you know you've been letting Jesus be your reference point. Yeah. Do you follow? I was on the phone to her and I said, she said, have you guys got any ideas? And I said, you bet we have. And then put the phone down and thought, I might tell you that full story some other time, later tonight or tomorrow, I'm not sure, but I can tell you as a result of what we've done, alcohol-related violence has dropped by 60% in our neighbourhood. Now folks, we're not super wonderful, just be like us. We're just trying to be like him. We send hundreds of people out into the streets on Fridays and Saturday nights to listen, help and care people who are intoxicated from the pubs, because that's what Jesus would do. What would Jesus do in your town or village? Sometimes it's bringing blessings and peace and goodness, but the other times, sometimes Jesus actually brings people down, and maybe that's what you need to do in your context too. You know, one of my favourite stories from the Gospels is the story about when, when Jairus, the teacher of the law, races out and grabs Jesus to come and heal his daughter. You remember this story? Like Jairus is a teacher of the law. He's a protector of the Torah and of the people of God. It's like, I'll bet he probably even told people, don't follow Jesus. I know where the Messiah should come from. It's not from up north. Jesus has no credentials. The men hanging around him are very impressionable. Don't go out there. You'll humiliate yourself. Stay here. Stay in the fold. Keep studying the Torah. But desperation makes fools of all of us, does it not? And his daughter is dying, and so he humbles himself. He humiliates himself and races out into the street and begs this crackpot, this snake oil salesman, Jesus, please come and heal my daughter. And Jesus says, sure, man, I'll heal your daughter. Take me to her. And Jairus grabs his hand and is leading him through the crowd quickly to get to his daughter. And then Jesus yanks his hand out of Jairus' hands. And Jesus says, wait, I'm coming. I'll be with you in a second. It's just that somebody just touched me. And who was that? And it says that the disciples said, well, there's a large crowd around you, Jesus, which is their way of saying, take your pick. And Jesus says, no, I don't mean just like touch me or jostle me. Somebody just touched me with the touch of faith. I just felt something go out of me. So who was that? And then it says, they all denied it. Now, it's one of the funniest lines in the Gospels, don't you reckon? It's like, who just touched me? I felt something go out of me. And then they're all going, oh, it wasn't me. Did you touch me? I wasn't me. I mean, no, I didn't touch you. Maybe it was here. And then Jesus does something that my old primary or elementary school teacher used to do when someone had done something naughty and we didn't know who it was. Jesus says, okay, well, no one's leaving here until whoever did that owns up. And then in one of the most touching moments in the Gospels, in an assembly which would have been made up mainly of men, this poor desperate woman steps out of the darkness. We know her as the hemorrhaging woman or the bleeding woman. She's had an issue of blood for 12 years. You know, in Jesus' time, when a woman was menstruating, she was considered unclean. We know there's nothing unclean about a menstrual cycle, but that was the idea at that time. Your man would not lie with you. You couldn't go to the temple or the synagogue. And in some very strict communities, you couldn't even go to the marketplace. So you're unclean for, human connection for that period of time every month. It's crazy, I know. This woman isn't menstruating, but this woman has been bleeding for 12 years. Can you imagine her? She hasn't worshipped Yahweh. She's not allowed in the temple. No man would lie with her. She's completely alone. And in those days, a woman without a man was in a very desperate situation. We're told she has spent all of her money on doctors and remedies to no effect. Now imagine her. She would be gaunt from starvation. She could not, terrible thing to say, she could not even resort to prostitution. So here she is starving to death. She would be filthy. Could you imagine what she looks like? She would stink. And Jesus does a remarkable thing. See, she's touched Jesus and the issue of blood has stopped. She's healed. The deal has been done. What is Jesus doing? Jesus forces her into the assembly of men. She steps forward and says, I touched you. And Jesus looks at her, I'm sure, with his face beaming. And he says, what she already knows, it is your faith that made you well. He's not saying it for her benefit, I don't think, because she probably knew that. Who's he saying it to? He's saying it to the assembly of men. You want to know what faith looks like, boys? Look at that. Go in peace, my daughter. So what is the gospel writing doing for us? He's saying to us this. When you look like Jesus, when you embody the presence of the living God breathed upon you, the Holy Spirit in you, the proud will be humbled. The proud will be humiliated. But the broken and the humiliated will be esteemed and lifted up. If you're letting Jesus be your reference point, you've got to ask some serious questions about who gets lifted up in your presence. You also got to ask yourself, like, who despises you or is humiliated by you? Not because you're trying to humiliate them, but because the presence of God undermines their pride and their personal glory. You've got to ask yourself questions like that. Let Jesus be your reference point. Don't guess. Don't make it up. Don't pretend. Read the freaking Gospels over and over and over. Marinate your soul in them. If he is beautiful, it's the most ugly beauty that you could ever have imagined. And it has set us free. You with me? Okay, so you're going to let Jesus be your reference point. Secondly, I want you to foster a radical spirituality of engagement. Now, just in case that phrase doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you, most people from the pietistic or Puritan heritage, and that pretty much means just about everyone in Norway, I think. You will have a perspective that thinks that retreat is the most primary form of time with God. So that when you come to church, go to a retreat, go to a conference centre, go to a prayer meeting, when you move out of the world into retreat, that's time with God. I get filled up, I get blessed. I mean, I feel butterflies in my stomach, a hair on the back of my neck. It's like, that's time with God. And then engagement, serving the poor, preaching the gospel, transforming unjust structures, celebrating, eating, raising children, gardening, skiing, surfing, all of that. Well, that's just not time with God. And the harder it gets, the more depleting that might be. What you need to do, folks, is to foster a spirituality that says retreat is time with God and engagement is also time with God. That is a radical spirituality of engagement. I have students who used to come to me and they used to say, look, I'm going to drop out of seminary and just take time out of church for a while. I just feel as though I just need to pull back from all of that in order to spend some time with God. Have you heard anyone talk like that? The word has got out around the campus now. You don't say that to me. Because I would literally hit the roof. I would throw things around the room. I would scream and yell. I would say, studying the Bible, studying theology, serving in the church, feeding the poor, clothing the naked, that is not time with God. So you need to stop all of that so you could go what? And spend time with God doing what, where, what, how? Jesus says, whatever you do for even the least of my brothers and sisters, it's as if you do it for me. When you are serving the poor, it's an act of worship. It's time with God. When you are preaching the gospel to someone, you are praising God in heaven. It's an act of worship. It's time with God. I'm not saying you don't need retreat. I think there is a rhythm in our life where we do need to come aside. But what we need to recognise is engagement is time with God. Retreat is time with God. It's all time with God. Isn't this what Jesus came to tell us about in the first place? I mean, what did the Jews believe? They believed when you were doing business, eating in the marketplace, raising kids, that was all just profane nothing time. But then you would come into holy gatherings, you would wash yourself ceremonially, you would say certain rites of purification, and you would make yourself holy and be in the presence of God. What does Jesus do? He shatters that whole framework of thinking, doesn't he? In John's Gospel, John tells us the very first miracle that Jesus performed was to turn water into wine at a drunken Galilean feast. Now, just in case you thought, oh, that was just a clever sort of party trick. It was more than some party trick, folks. You know, in Jesus' time, when a man's wife gave birth to a daughter, a man would take a barrel of wine, vinegary, just the wine you just wash your meal down with. He'd put that barrel of wine aside. He would do that every year on her birthday until she was to be married, age 14, 15, 16. So when she comes to be betrothed and then wed, he can bring out 16 barrels of wine with which to celebrate the feast. And of course, you start with the stuff which is 16 years old. This stuff doesn't taste like vinegar anymore, does it? This has been sitting here in oak barrels for 16 years. This now tastes like rich, complex, earthy South Australian Cabernet. We would fill a glass of that and we would drink it, and at any wedding we would say to the father of the bride, "What kind of man are you that so faithfully for 16 years you've prepared for this moment? No daughter could wish for a better father than this." And then we'd work our way through 16 barrels of wine. So by the time we got to the 14th, 15th, 16th barrel, yeah, it tastes like vinegar, but do we care? In this context, they run out of wine, and Mary, feeling the embarrassment, this father will not be forever known as the man who prepared properly for his daughter's wedding, but for the man who didn't prepare. Mary turns to Jesus and says, "I think it's time now for you to do something." It always makes me think, how many times did Mary pull that one in the 30 years up until then? Don't you reckon? It's like, oh, we're all out of dishwashing liquid. I mean, come on, Jesus, like now, seriously. Now, Jesus, like seriously, look, I mean, this man, he's going to be, come on. And Jesus decides, yeah, now. Why? To save this man some embarrassment? It does do that. Because when they drink the wine that Jesus produces, what do they say of it? This is the direct translation from the Greek. They say, oh, this tastes like rich, earthy South Australian Cabernet. Most people bring out the crap at the end of the party. You've brought out 16-year-old stuff. Good on you, Dad. But that's not the reason for the miracle. What water does Jesus turn into wine? He turns the water that is used for purification rites. Symbols of separation. Symbol of the fact that some are in and some are not. Jesus turns that into the wine of fellowship and hospitality. So clever, is it not? All the things that you set up to say, this is time with God and that's not, Jesus blows them apart. Purification water? No. Just drink Australian Cabernet. You're welcome at my table. That's how he begins his ministry. And the point at which he ends it, by offering up his spirit, what happens in the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem? But that great curtain is rent from top to bottom. Why would we be surprised that that happened in Jerusalem at the point at which he died? We knew it was going to happen as soon as we read John chapter 2. And purification water gets turned into delicious wine. I want you to foster a spirituality that values prayer on the mountains outside Jerusalem as much as it values caring for the poor, laying your hands on lepers, partying with tax collectors. That's time with God. Do you follow? Whilst ever we foster a pietistic, puritanical view that draws us out of this world and says, unless I'm in the church and experiencing something just between me and God, it's not really the real thing, we're not going to create a movement of missionaries in this world. So in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, I want to drive out the spirit of Puritanism from each of you now. Be gone, spirit of pietism. When you feed the poor, When you sit in the gutter with a girl on a Saturday night who's crying her eyes out because her boyfriend is with someone else in the pub. When you work to protect this environment in which we live. When you speak to your city elders about an unjust arrangement. When you party. When you pray. When you engage. When you retreat. Jesus is present. Go into this world fostering a spirituality that acknowledges time with God under all circumstances. And then thirdly, I want you to be inspired by prevenient grace. Okay, who knows what prevenient grace is? Yeah, good. I love teaching Lutherans something. This is a Wesleyan idea. Now, I'm not a Wesleyan, I'm not a Methodist, but I think John Wesley was onto something quite remarkable. Prevenient grace, as you can see from this word here, it's a little bit like the English word convenient, isn't it? If you take the pre away and put convenient. We would say that tonight's meeting and tonight's conference got convened when somebody stood up and said, welcome, have your seats, let's get started, right? So someone convened our meeting. But before it began, a whole bunch of people had prevened for it to happen. Put out the chairs, planned the worship, sent out invitations, put it on Facebook or however they did it. You with me? So a whole bunch of things happened leading up to something being convened. So here's what prevenient grace is. Prevenient grace is a belief in the fact that God is at work prevening in the lives of people before any of us turn up to convene any ministry in their life. Do you believe that? Yeah. I believe it too. I've never met anyone yet who hasn't admitted to the fact that they've had some kind of spiritual experience of one kind or another. Australia has only one novelist who's ever won the Nobel Prize for Literature. I thought I'd throw in a Nobel Prize story while I'm here in Scandinavia. His name is Patrick White. He was writing in the 50s, 60s and 70s. By the 1970s, he was world famous, he was very rich, and he was considered a great hero in Australia because he'd won the Nobel Prize. He was openly gay, he was openly an atheist, he was an outspoken, arrogant, kind of puffed up man by all accounts. In the 1970s in Australia, to be gay, to be an atheist, and to be arrogant were very, well, I was going to say very unusual. They probably weren't that unusual, but they're very unusual to be proud about all those things. In his autobiography, which is a big, thick book, which basically just tells you just what an awesome and amazing man he is, he tells this one story which takes your breath away. He tells the story of how when he was living in a small farm just outside of Sydney with his gay partner, now world famous, living on his reputation as a great man. It had been raining for days and days and days, and the farm had turned to mud, and the stones that you walked on to get down to the bottom of the farm had turned mossy and slippery. He had to feed the dogs that they kept in the shed down at the bottom of the property. So he put on his raincoat and his boots. He got a tray and put bowls on it, filled it with wet dog food, put on his rain hat, and then picked up the tray of dog food and walked out the back door down to where the dogs were kept. He said he got about halfway when both feet slipped out from under him. He said, I kind of went up in the air, I landed on my backside, had shooting pains down my leg, my back was killing me, and then bowls of dog food rained down on top of me. So he said, I'm lying there in my backyard, covered in mud and dog food, in absolute agony, and I look up at this bruised, blackened sky with these massive raindrops pouring down on top of me. And he said, and I just started to giggle. He said, I felt in my soul as though someone had said, who the hell do you think you are? He said, I rolled over onto all fours, I crawled inside, I said to Mannerly, which was his partner, we have to go to church this Sunday. What is that? Proud, arrogant, master of his own destiny, gay, atheist. He slips on the stones, he realises his own folly of his pride. And who does he think of? God. The sad thing about this story is that he and Manly went to the Church of England church around the corner. They sat in the back row. That day the vicar stood up and he said that he had noticed members of his congregation at the county fair that had been on the day before, and they had been entering the jelly bean guessing competition. And because that was gambling, you needed to repent of that before you could come forward to receive Holy Communion. Patrick White writes in his autobiography, at that moment, Manly and I realised that whatever faith we might have had, it needed to remain an entirely private matter. Breaks your heart, doesn't it? Yeah. God trips up Australia's only Nobel Prize winner for literature. God whispers in his ear, who the hell do you think you are? And when he goes to God's people, they've got nothing for him. I believe God is tripping people up all the time, don't you? All the time. As soon as I read that book, I thought to myself, you're kidding. Patrick White? Right, that does it. So now whenever anyone tells me that they're not religious or they're an atheist or something like that, my standard line is, so you've never had any religious experiences? You know, because like people meet me, hi, what do you do for a job? I mean, I used to kind of, I'm a professor, what do you teach? Oh, I teach. Let it kind of sneak up on them. But now I just say, oh, look, I'm a Baptist minister. They say, you're kidding? Like you are, really? Yeah, I am. Yeah, I teach at a college, I train Baptist ministers. People still do that today, do they? Yeah, so they're kidding, how about that? And then they say, I don't know if this ever happens to you, but they give you their religious pedigree. They say, you're a Baptist minister. No kidding. Because my father's next door neighbour's aunt used to be married to a lady who was the son or daughter of a Methodist preacher. And I always say, oh, well, you and I are very similar then. And then they say, but not that I'm religious, of course. And then I pull out my favourite line. I say, so you've never had a religious experience? Everyone I've ever asked that of says, oh yeah, no, I've had religious experiences. So I say, I'm just a collector of people's religious experiences. Tell me your favourite one. I had a woman say to me, when I gave birth to my daughter, and they brought this squirming, bloody little thing up onto my breast, I looked at her and I thought, oh no, surely life doesn't come from within me. That's a religious experience, isn't it? You know, where I live, guys will regularly say to you, when I'm sitting on a board waiting for another set to roll in from the Tasman Sea, I feel the surge of the South Pacific rolling underneath me, the green-blue ocean, and I look down into it and I think, ay. That's a religious experience, isn't it? I've had people tell me that they've been to Buddhist ashrams and New Age retreats and they've had Reiki massage, they do Tai Chi, you name it. God is whispering into people's ears all the time. His fingerprints are all over them. Yeah. And you know what they need? They just need somebody who knows to be able to give the name of the God that they've encountered but who they didn't realise. You need to be able to say, I can tell you who you are feeling surging underneath you when you've sat on that board. I can tell you where your daughter's life came from. I can tell you what was behind the yearning that sent you to the Tai Chi class or the Reiki master. I can tell you the name of the God that's turned up in your life but who you don't yet know. You let Jesus be your reference point. You foster a spirituality of engagement. You believe in prevenient grace. And when people ask you or tell you what they've experienced, you name the name of the God that they've encountered. It's not exactly rocket science, is it? In some respects, it's actually dead easy. All you have to do is spend lots of time with the same people over a long period of time. You see, I reckon in mission, there are two levels of time. There's chronos time, and then there's kairos time. You familiar with those two ideas? Chronos time is tick, 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 tick time. It's just time as we understand it from our watch. And then Kairos time is these little moments of special revelation. Well, the thing is, folks, you never get the moment unless you spend lots of tick, 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 tick with people. It's like raising teenagers. If any of you have done that, you'll know exactly what it's like. When you're raising little children, as soon as you turn up, they're ready for action. Have you noticed? You just turn on a child, it's ready to play, talk, fun. But as soon as these darling little things become teenagers, it all changes. Because when you say, Daddy's home, here I am, like, how you doing? What's happening? Everything okay? Yep. Hi, how's school? School's going real good for you, is it? Is everything okay? Yep. You got any problems? Anything relationally? No. You okay with God? Anything else you wanted to tell me? Like, no. But the thing I've discovered with teenagers is you'll be sitting on the lounge late at night and you'll turn the movie off, whatever it is, and you're just about to go to bed and your daughter will say, Dad. Or you pick her up from a dance one night, you're driving home. What I discovered is, with teenage girls at least, lots of tick, 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 tick. And when you least expect it, well, I'd say the same is the case in mission. I would say you let Jesus be your reference point. You foster a spirituality of engagement and connection. You believe that God is at work, but you won't find out those times until after all that tick, 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 tick chronos time. At the pub late at night, walking home from the movie, after you've played a game of hockey, driving in a car to a concert. And you better be ready. You better be ready right there, right then, to give voice to the one who sent you. I was at a dinner party once with this guy, and I must admit, I talk to people about Jesus quite a lot. So, I don't know if I'm being a bit sanctimonious here, but I think it's okay to ask the Lord for a few nights off every so often. So there's sometimes I go out and I say to my wife, Kaz, I'm not talking to anyone about Jesus tonight. I don't want to hear their whole life story. We're going to talk about the rugby, we'll talk about cricket, we'll talk about the floods, we'll talk about politics, the weather, whatever. But the Lord understands. Like in the big poker game of faith, I've got lots of chips, so I'll just cash a few in tonight, I'm just not going to say anything. I go to this dinner party and I'm sitting opposite the host, who's a Christian. Kaz is up the other end of the table, we're Christians. No one else are Christians at this party. And there's a big guy sitting on the edge of the table. He'd come without his wife because she was ill. Fairly overweight, large guy, drank lots of big balloons of red wine all night. Big garrulous, big talking kind of guy. You know the kind of guy I'm talking about? Do you have any of those in Norway? Anyway, we got lots of them, let me tell you. My host says to me, hey Mike, how's your new book going? Is it selling well? And I said, yeah, actually I've been really pleased with how it's been received. So the guy on the end of the table, what do you think he says? You've written a book, have you? Seriously? Like, wow, what is your book about? I'm not talking about Jesus tonight, remember? So I thought I'm going to kill this conversation, just nip it in the bud. So I said, well, it's actually about innovative ways of fashioning faith collectives. That's what it's about, but no one's going to know what that means, right? Innovative ways of fashioning faith collectives. This guy says, are you kidding? He reaches into pulls out his business card. I'm the director of the Australian Institute for Innovation, he says. I was like, ay. He says, so what's your matrix of innovation? It's like, I'm thinking, oh crap. I'm saying some stuff. He's like, where a conversation gets going, he's working it out. Oh, faith, it's churches. You're a Christian. And so then he says, in a big loud voice, you know what the problem with guys like you is? All the other conversations stop because or want to know what the problem with guys like me is. You know what the problem with guys like you is, he says? You got a bloody good product, but your delivery system is screwed. He didn't say screwed, but I'm being especially polite. He laughs, a few other people laugh, they go back to their conversation. And then I turn to him and I say, you know something, I'm actually inclined to agree with you. I said, but I'd really be interested to know, like as someone who's not a churchgoer, what do you think is so good about our product? He said, well, what I meant was, like, Jesus is your product. You've got no problems there. It's very saleable. Jesus is very, very appealing. What I meant was, church, it sucks. If you've got to go to church to get Jesus, like, forget it. You've got something wrong with your system there. No, I said, no, I got that the first time. I understand what you're saying. And I said, I'm inclined to agree with you, but I'm not so much concerned about what you think about church, just as a matter of market, research. I'd love to know what you would think. What are the really kind of saleable aspects of Jesus? Oh, he said, no, you're fine with Jesus. Don't change that. Just change the church. Yes, so tell me particularly what you like about Jesus. Oh, he said, Jesus is, there's no problems there. He's something else, that Jesus. I mean, like when I think about Jesus, I just think he did a lot of, like he was, what did he do? He died at Christmas time, and he was, he really, I said to him, mate, you don't know anything about Jesus, do you? Oh, he said, no, come on, that's not fair. I think he was, no, actually. He said, I don't now that you mention it. So I said, can I take like 2 or 3 minutes and tell you why you're right? Why Jesus is a bloody good product? He's got a big balloon full of red wine, plonks it down, fire away, he says. Now, folks, you've only got 2 or 3 minutes. He doesn't want a lecture. He doesn't want, in the beginning, God created the world. And it was perfect in every way. And humankind had a perfect and intimate relationship with each other and with him. But sin came into the garden. They ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. My 2 minutes is up. He didn't ask me about trees or gardens or Adams or Eves. He said, you got 2 or 3 minutes. Tell me why I think I'm right, that Jesus really is a good product. What would you say? Because if you don't know what to say now, don't follow Jesus into mission. You just embarrass the rest of us. 3 minutes. Why is Jesus a bloody good product? Your time starts now. My fear is, folks, most people in this room wouldn't know what to say. Most of my students don't know what to say. I do this with my students. I tell them that story and I say, you got 3 minutes now, go, you. You got 3 minutes now, you. One guy said, choose me, I can do it, okay? Do it, 3 minutes. Tell me, why is Jesus such a great product? He said, Jesus is a spring of living water bubbling up to eternal life. Well, Jesus actually said something like that, didn't he? But you reckon a guy at a dinner party is going to know what the heck you're talking about? You know what I do with my students? I say, I want you to write 2 pages on why you think Jesus is marvellous. And then I want you to give it to a non-Christian person and ask them to grade it for you. And you fail my class if you don't turn it in. The living water guy wrote it all out, Jesus is living water, gave it to one of his mates, and they came back and said, I didn't understand a word of that. What does that mean? This is a man who's been raised in the church, who loves Jesus, who's absolutely committed and devoted. I don't have any questions about that. But clearly, he's never been at a dinner party or a gathering or a pub He's never played a game of sport with a non-Christian person and never been asked, what's the big deal about Jesus? Because you don't have time for a lecture, you're having a conversation. I was in a church once and I'd preached, standing next to the minister, and this non-Christian guy came up to us. He said, hey, listen, I'm not a church guy, I'm kind of keen on this girl, and she told me if I kind of liked her, I had to come to church with her, so it's like, you know, I'm not that keen on it all, but I kind of like the talk, thanks for that. And but can I just ask you guys something? Like, I hear what you're saying, Jesus, and you know, but what's the big deal about Jesus? Why are you so focused on Jesus? I mean, we dream of moments like this, don't we? It's kind of like we're in church, you're talking to two ministers, what is the big deal about Jesus? So the minister says, oh, Mike, do you mind if I answer this question? No, I said, you should, because if this guy's going to have anything more to do with you guys, he should know you, so go ahead. And what did the minister say? God created the world in 6 days, and it was perfect and unique, but sin occurred, and we were broken in relationships between each other and with God. I looked at this guy's face. You know when people's eyes glaze over? You know when they kind of start looking around the room like, yeah, they're smiling. Because you know where this minister's going, don't you? You know why he started there, don't you? If I said that to you, you'd know I know where he's going. You know, creation, sin, atonement, redemption, the cross. You know where it's going. But you're a non-Christian and you know nothing, and you just asked about Jesus. What's creation in 6 days got to do with this? I want you to learn Jesus. I want you to follow him into mission. I want you to believe that engaging with people is time with God, and I want you to spend lots of chronos time with them so that when the kairos moments happen and they open their life to the fact that the prevenient grace of God has been working in their life, you are there and able to speak about the one who has set us free.